November 14th, 2025. In the thick Donetsk fog, Russia's mobile reinforcement group, 52 motorcycles carrying 100 armed troops, along with an armored vehicle, had just crossed the border, pushing straight toward the Pokrovsk battlefield. Their objective: turn 3 small border villages into staging hub vehicles, a forward operating base carved directly into Ukrainian soil. The dirt road running along the border was believed to be cleared by their own reconnaissance drones, but they were wrong. From above, every movement was already captured in full by a PD-2. On the ground, an entire field of anti-tank mines and anti-personnel mines worth less than $60 was waiting. And inside the forest, 30 kamikaze FPV drones stood by for launch. Within minutes of movement, half of the covert reinforcement column had already been scorched black. The formation shattered, and the rest was left to the FPV kamikaze teams. A fully formed Russian mobile reinforcement unit was wiped out completely, without a single Ukrainian soldier firing a weapon. So how exactly did this digital execution unfold? At 4:15 a.m. on November 14th, 2025, on the Pokrovsk front line, the hottest battlefield in eastern Ukraine. From the border, a Russian assault group quietly threaded through unnamed dirt tracks, heading straight for the front line zone. They had no idea their every movement was already inside the infrared lens of a PD-2 cruising silently at 6,900 feet, above a thick blanket of fog. The reconnaissance UAV had just completed the final phase of its mission, transmitting the full compressed data packet back to a forward operating base only 31 miles away. On the digital display of the operation commander, every Russian target appeared with crystal clarity. Leading the column was a low-flying Russian UAV tasked with mine detection and artillery trace tracking. About 3,200 feet behind came a maneuver group of 52 off-road motorcycles, each carrying 2 Russian troops, one driving, one holding a rifle, and a few hauling RPG-7 launchers. And at the tail, an MTLB command carrier. More than 100 Russian infantrymen in total, ready to bring fresh firepower directly into the Pokrovsk battlefield, where Ukrainian forces were reported to be holding layered defensive lines. If this force slipped through Ukraine's defenses, it could open a tactical breach large enough to trigger follow-up armored breakthrough waves, threatening the entire southern defense axis of the city. But that wasn't all. In less than 3 minutes, the Russian maneuver column would enter a minefield of anti-infantry and anti-tank charges laid by a Ukrainian sapper team the previous night, concealed under thin mud and expertly camouflaged grass. And more importantly, they were not alone on the thermal map. From a forest cluster 3.1 miles away, a line of personal UAV launchers fired simultaneously. 30 kamikaze FPV drones, each carrying a penetrator incendiary warhead, launched together, streaking toward the targets. Directly commanding the strike was Team 429 Achilles, Ukraine's elite UAV unit, monitoring every movement through the PD-2's data link, assigning attack vectors to each drone cluster. A brutal confrontation was imminent, and this time it would begin even before the Russian formation reached the main battlefield. At 4:25 a.m., hundreds of meters above, a Russian reconnaissance UAV circled steadily over the logistics corridor. Its optical camera swept across empty fields, but detected nothing. No signal emissions, no unusual movement, no abnormal heat trace. The UAV's AI concluded, "Area secure." No one in the Russian formation knew they had just passed directly over camouflage nets, meticulously reshaped soil mounds, and TM-62 mines buried at the exact depth required to leave no visual anomalies on reconnaissance imagery. The 52 off-road motorcycles continued to turn down the dirt path leading into a narrow valley, maintaining steady speed. No one slowed down. No one dispersed. They fully believed their drones had cleared the route. A few soldiers in the rear even glanced over their shoulders, checking the sky to ensure no Ukrainian UAVs were tailing them. Nothing but white fog and engine noise. None of them knew they were riding straight into the heart of a Ukrainian minefield and were less than 295 feet from the first kill point. The lead motorcycle throttled up slightly to crest a small mound, its front tire crushing a layer of dry grass carefully laid the previous night. Beneath that grass, a TM-62 anti-tank mine planted shallow at exactly 2 inches, just enough for Russian UAV cameras to scan the ground and still see nothing. Even an image processing AI rescanning the same spot would conclude natural soil texture. The column moved as if the path belonged to them. ATVs, dirt bikes, 2-stroke engines screaming. Some Russian troops even signaling each other to speed up to reach the rendezvous point on time. At the western tree line, Team 429 Achilles tracked every meter the Russian column was about to cross. PD-2 signals streamed into the command channel. The targets were entering the kill zone. Boom! A sharp blast erupted. The 7th motorcycle, riding slightly to the right flank, struck a pressure-triggered TM-62. The explosion hurled both the motorcycle and its 2 riders into the air like scraps of cloth, flinging them nearly 50 feet away, breaking apart as thermal silhouettes on the PD-2's FLIR feed. 2 more blasts went off almost simultaneously on the left flank. Another 3 bikes vanished in fire and smoke. One was shredded by a double charge, and the entire front cluster of the convoy, nearly 20 vehicles, fell into the multi-layered minefield. Some riders slammed their brakes in panic, but braking on dirt, in fog, amid screaming chaos, only disintegrated the formation further. One soldier, lucky to be crushed like the others, jumped off and tried to flee, only to step on a mine seconds later. The MTLB at the rear attempted to radio for coordination, but the signal was... The soldiers began to scatter and run on foot, but that was exactly what Ukraine had planned for. In less than 30 seconds, the Russian formation collapsed, 1/3 of the force wounded or no longer breathing. The surviving groups dared neither advance nor retreat. Ahead of them were mines. Behind them, FPV drones were closing in, from 3 forest edges. The minefield was only the opening act. Ukraine had not fired a single shot. No artillery, no kamikaze drones, just mines and the enemy's overconfidence. At the exact moment the Russian formation broke apart from the mines, the real performance began. From 3 forest directions, northwest, southeast, and directly south, 30 kamikaze FPV drones surged forward like living spears. Each one had been hard-locked onto its target via guidance data streamed from the PD-2 overhead. Targeting updates refreshed continuously, even as Russian troops abandoned their motorcycles and fled on foot. Each drone belonged to the FPV-5S Stiletto class, a kamikaze platform built from a reinforced 5-inch carbon racing frame using digital control links and high-frequency 5.8 GHz transmission, boosted by directional patch antennas to resist Russian EW interference. Each carried a high-explosive warhead with 11 pounds of TNT, enough to ensure no Russian silhouette would move again after being hit. The command center of Team 429 Achilles issued the final order. Wave 1, launch all. All targets are inside the kill zone. The first 5 drones sliced through the low tree line and dove into the cluster of vehicles trapped inside the minefield. The lead drone surged at 111 miles per hour, slammed into the MTLB command vehicle, punched through its front hatch, and detonated the ammunition and equipment inside. Boom! A vertical fire column nearly 65 feet high erupted, flipping the hull and tearing off the turret. 2 other drones struck motorcycles attempting to turn and escape the area. Russian troops were blown off their seats, thrown into deep roadside craters, unconscious or killed instantly. The second UAV cluster, 10 drones, attacked from the southeast. They did not strike the center, instead focusing on soldiers running toward an open patch of ground they believed to be a safe hiding spot. But Achilles knew. That patch was a kill funnel. Each drone selected a single soldier, approached at low altitude, and detonated the moment it touched ground. A chain of explosions ripped open the earth. Bodies, fragments, soil, and debris flung skyward, coating the PD-2's reconnaissance feed in drifting gray dust. The remaining 9 drones from the northwest dropped low and struck the last cluster, trying to escape along the forest edge. One drone hit 3 soldiers crouching behind a tree trunk, obliterating all of them. Several motorcycles tried to outrun the drones across open fields. Others fired rifles upward at the incoming FPVs, but were blown apart by anti-tank charges seconds later. The final drone, with a live camera feed, tailed a Russian soldier crawling through a drainage ditch, waited for him to raise his head, then detonated. A total of 30 FPV drones executed 28 direct hits. 2 lost signal mid-flight due to interference, but the outcome was unaffected. The entire 2,300 feet stretch, once the approach route to Pokrovsk, was now a ruin of motorcycles, bodies, and thick black smoke spiraling upward. Of the 52 vehicles, only 7 remained intact, but none had riders. Russia's reinforcement wave was entirely wiped out. Everything fell into an eerie silence. Only the soft crackling of flames from the burned vehicles, the popping of unexploded rounds cooking off, and a towering column of black smoke, dozens of meters high, marked the place where Russia's mobile assault force had once existed. From 6,900 feet up, the PD-2 hovered in the fog, recording the devastation below, like a shredded thermal map. The glowing heat signatures, the surviving soldiers, faded one by one. Some went dark immediately, others flickered, then vanished. On the Ukrainian Operations Command screen, officers watched in silence. No commentary was needed, no additional artillery. The mission was complete. Below, the minefield remained, many charges still unused. The unused FPV drones were preserved for the next target. A Ukrainian sapper team was already en route, not to fight, but to collect bodies and salvage intact equipment from the Russians. 1 truckload of Russian rifles and personal weapons was gathered entirely by the Ukrainian sappers. On the dew-soaked ground of Pokrovsk, an attack with no gunfire, no shouting, no trench clashes, no close-quarters battle, only mines, UAVs, and deadly silence, had written a new chapter in how Ukraine defends every kilometer of land with technology, patience, and surgical precision. From behind the hillside, a light Russian armored group appeared, 2 MTLBS and 1 BTR-82A, dispatched to investigate the lost radio signal from the motorcycle unit ahead. They had no intention to engage, only to scout, drawn toward the towering black pillar of smoke rising from Pokrovsk like a burning obelisk in the fog. As they approached the scene, they saw only corpses. The entire 400-meter dirt road was but charred motorcycle frames, melted wheels, scattered seats, and bodies lying amid deep blast craters carved by mines and UAVs. The lead MTLB halted, its turret scanning for enemy presence, but there was no gunfire, no engines, only deadly silence. The scene before them did not resemble a battle, but a digital execution, where technology and preparation had annihilated a large force in under 5 minutes without a single firefight. A Russian soldier inside the BTR radioed back to headquarters. "We've arrived. There's nothing left. Everything has been wiped out." No Ukrainian drones appeared, no second ambush, only a cold, silent battlefield, just enough to deliver a message. Not every corridor is meant for reinforcements to survive. Dawn over the Zaporizhzhia region. A Russian motorized convoy carrying more than 150 infantry troops, artillery shells, and electronic warfare systems silently crossed the border. Destination: Huliaipol, 39 miles from Zaporizhzhia, a defensive axis Russia intended to pierce at any cost. The lead BTR-82A ordered the convoy to accelerate, but the Russian commander had no idea. They had exactly 4 minutes before entering the kill zone. A natural mud field would bog the convoy down just long enough for the kamikaze UAV strike team to hit every vehicle. At 5:10 a.m., September 11th, 2025, along the T-040 route, Russia's main logistics artery, a Shark V reconnaissance UAV detected a heat signature 3 miles away. On the operator's screen, it became crystal clear, a 15-vehicle convoy rolling forward, the mobile weapons depot supplying Russia's eastern front. Leading was a BTR-82A, deploying 3 Orlan 10 UAVs flying low for mine detection and terrain scanning. 13 KAMAZ trucks followed, carrying not only 150 infantrymen, but an entire ammunition stockpile. A total of 525 ammo crates, 240,000 rounds of 39mm, 30,000 rounds of 7.62mm, and more than 200 artillery shells and rockets, plus a batch of kamikaze UAVs, tactical radios, satellite comms, and at the rear, a BTR-80K command vehicle. Enough firepower to reinforce Russia's front line and strike Ukraine's defenses. They had just left the last electronic defense bubble, including Russia's S-400 systems near the border. Ahead lay a natural trap, pine forests on both sides, and a 656-foot stretch of waterlogged soft mud road. When the convoy slowed for 4 minutes with visibility restricted, that was all Ukraine needed to prepare a strike capable of wiping it out entirely. 1.8 miles to the west, the Valkyrie 12 Special Operations Team from Ukraine's 65th Brigade had been waiting in the forest for 3 hours. All UAV launch pads were camouflaged 3 hours earlier when intelligence confirmed the convoy's entry into Ukrainian territory. The attack team consisted of 9 members, 1 mission commander, and 8 of the brigade's most skilled drone pilots. Inside each tactical case they carried were FPV UAVs, control systems, digital screens, and an RFI anti-jamming unit. Alongside were 5 wooden crates, each containing 4 HE warheads stored cold, freshly taken out and mounted to kamikaze UAVs using specialized adhesive and tape. A total of 20 kamikaze UAVs lifted off simultaneously under orders from the young commander, racing forward at 55 miles per hour, just 3 minutes from the convoy. The convoy reached the terrain transition point. Ahead lay the 200-plus meter mud trench, the ground saturated after days of rain, soft and unable to bear vehicle weight. At 5:14 a.m., the convoy entered the dead zone. The lead BTR-82A was forced to slow to under 9.3 miles per hour. Its front tires slipped lightly, losing grip, forcing the driver to throttle gently and hold a straight line. Behind it, each KAMAZ followed closely, reducing speed together to avoid getting stuck or colliding. The convoy compressed tightly, with only a few meters between vehicles. Visibility was cut by thin fog and forest shadows, forcing drivers to inch forward cautiously. The entire convoy was forced to crawl, with no alternative route. And that was the exact moment they became fixed targets, exactly as Ukraine had planned. From the western pine forest, 20 kamikaze UAVs simultaneously powered on. The sound of dozens of electric motors merged into a low, tight vibration, clean and without warning. They lifted off in groups of 3 or 4, shooting above the tree line at 16 feet, hugging terrain to avoid detection. Others followed at 32 feet, weaving between tree trunks, multiple parallel approach acts. Their speed surged to 68 miles per hour within seconds. Overhead, 2 navigation UAVs held a steady 49-foot altitude, descending diagonally at a 25-degree angle to lock onto each vehicle in the Russian formation. None flew above the canopy. All maintained silent, stable flight paths, sticking to the pre-programmed waypoints Valkyrie 12 had mapped earlier. The BTR-80K at the rear was the first to detect abnormal movement. Its communication suite instantly switched to emergency mode. The command vehicle activated its full electronic warfare suite. The R-168 transmitter and short-range signal amplifier surged to maximum output. Its roof-mounted antennas shifted into wide broadcast mode, pumping dense electromagnetic waves across the entire frequency band. The jamming wave rolled back toward the forest like an invisible shield. It blocked UAV controls by blasting the 900 MHz band and 1.2 to 1.6 GHz spectrum, driving noise levels sharply upward. Signal packets between UAVs and their controllers became congested and desynchronized. Instantly, the entire FPV swarm was affected. The lead drones began stuttering, their video feeds turning into noisy, pixelated static. Several UAVs suffered periodic half-second signal losses, triggering their auto-throttle to slow down and avoid crashing. 3 UAVs on the right flank drifted sideways due to degraded orientation stability. One drone abruptly gained 6.5 feet in altitude before its balance system corrected it. 2 others decelerated sharply as their receivers became momentarily stuck in the jamming storm. At the center of the swarm, command latency increased noticeably. Rotation and heading commands responded half a beat late, making their movements jerky, rough, and imprecise. The swarm was nearly defeated, their control links moments away from being severed, turning them into dead metal plunging into the ground. But inside the pine forest, the moment the screens turned to white static, Valkyrie 12's technician deployed the RFI module from the tactical case. The device activated in counter-jamming mode, prioritizing link stability. The RFI fired a corrective signal packet stream across the same band the UAVs were operating on, relocking the jammed frequencies and shifting the controllers to a clean backup channel pre-configured earlier. The system scanned the spectrum automatically, cutting out the frequencies being attacked most aggressively by the Russian BTR-80K. Digital noise filters reduced background interference, lowering artificial RSSI levels and restoring control integrity. The return signal from the UAV swarm grew clearer. The UAVs that had drifted off axis slowly realigned, their stabilization systems functioning normally as data flow returned. Several drones switched to the backup control channel that the RFI had just opened, allowing them to escape the dense jamming field of the BTR-80K. The convoy commander inside the BTR-80K immediately sensed something was wrong. The electronic panel showed the jamming system was still stable, its output power untouched. But the UAV swarm ahead, instead of wobbling or crashing, held its speed, held its altitude, and continued closing in along the exact original trajectory. He realized the jamming layer was no longer enough to push the attack back. He switched on the intercom, his voice short and sharp. "All security elements use personal weapons, shoot them down now." Along both sides of the convoy, Russian troops flicked off their safeties, raised AK-74s and RPK-74s, attempting to lock targets onto the black dots rushing in from the pine forest. But the remaining distance was too short, the firing angles too narrow, and the UAV swarm did not lose a single beat of speed. By the time they squeezed their triggers, it was already too late. The convoy had no escape. The mud trench ahead had locked the entire formation in place at the worst possible moment. The lead BTR-82A tried to accelerate, but its wheels only dug deeper into the soaked mud. The KAMAZ line behind it was forced to slow in unison, each truck creeping until the convoy could only advance a few meters per minute. The gaps between vehicles compressed tightly, leaving no room to expand formation or accelerate out of the kill zone. Inside the BTR-80K, the Russian commander stared at the terrain screen and understood instantly. This stretch of road had turned the entire convoy into stationary targets. Outside, the UAV swarm was still diving, and the convoy had lost all mobility needed to evade. The 20 UAVs did not approach from a single direction. They split at 1,960 feet into 3 left diagonal axes, 3 right diagonal axes, 2 straight on, and the rest climbed a few extra meters before sliding down in angled dives, all locking onto one cluster of targets, the artillery and rocket KAMAZ trucks in the center. The mid-column KAMAZ haulers were the deadliest weak point, carrying hundreds of artillery rounds ready to detonate. In the final seconds, each FPV UAV pitched its seeker slightly, stabilized its sightline, and maintained 55 miles per hour before plunging. The first one struck the rear compartment of a KAMAZ loaded with 152mm shells. The penetration snapped the support frame. The HE warhead detonated, ripping apart the wooden crates and ammo storage inside. The second UAV slammed directly into the section carrying rocket propellant charges, the most flammable point. A flash ignited in less than a tenth of a second, followed by a blast that shoved the entire vehicle line sideways. Within under 2 seconds, the chain detonation began. The 152mm shells ignited, detonating one by one, producing shockwaves blasting outward on both sides. The 122mm rockets in the adjacent truck caught fire, launching uncontrollably in every direction like an ungoverned artillery battery. Crates of 7.62mm ammunition cooked off, spraying metal like shrapnel rain, tearing through the cabins of the vehicles behind. The FPV UAVs used by Valkyrie 12 were not industrial gear. They were custom-built from 10-inch carbon fiber frames, 4 motors with 9 by 4.5-inch propellers, and retuned ESCs allowed high load without overheating under heavy warheads. Power came from large-capacity 6S Li-ion packs strapped down with tactical tape. The critical component sat at the nose, a refined 4.4-pound HE charge inside a thin metal casing. At this moment, The lead BTR-82A was knocked sideways by reflected pressure, losing all command ability. Russian soldiers did not yet understand what had happened when the entire mid-convoy erupted into a single mass of fire, a continuous, uncontrollable source of explosions. The entire T-0401 route shook as if hit by a massive cluster bomb strike. The first blast did more than destroy the two central KAMAZ trucks. It dragged the entire remaining line into the kill radius instantly. Pressure from the exploding 152mm shells blew the driver's side door off the adjacent KAMAZ like paper, hurling the driver to the ground. Heat from the explosion exceeded 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, incinerating tarps and wooden crates in fractions of a second. At the rear, two trucks carrying 122mm rockets ignited in sequence. The launch tubes didn't detonate cleanly. They fired out of the truck, streaking wildly through the Russian ranks, producing unpredictable blades of fire. One rogue rocket slammed into the side of a troop-carrying Ural, sending flames sweeping straight into the passenger cabin. The truck burned like a torch. The remaining UAVs continued closing in. They did not strike the main blast zone. The swarm split exactly according to Valkyrie 12's initial tasking. At ranges under 320 feet, the electric motors of the UAVs blended into the sound of chain explosions. Russian troops heard nothing, saw nothing but black smoke and burning ammunition. Each UAV locked a target, dipped altitude, corrected aim, then dove. One slammed into the tactical radio truck, destroying the entire comms network. Another pierced the windshield of a KAMAZ carrying nearly 40 ammo crates. The secondary blast reignited the firestorm, stronger than the first. The convoy collapsed in under 28 seconds from the moment the first UAV struck. Thick smoke blanketed the T-040. Small fireballs continued detonating inside the charred KAMAZ wrecks, flinging shrapnel across the roadside. The surviving Russian soldiers began fleeing in panic. No formation, no command. They ran into the pine forest on both sides, desperately seeking shelter from the spreading blasts. Some were blown into roadside trenches by pressure waves, dazed and unable to stand. Others dropped their weapons and sprinted, trying to escape the kill zone their convoy had become. At the shattered center of the formation, only one armored vehicle remained intact, the lead BTR-82A. Its hull still held, its frontal armor unpierced, but its front wheels were half buried in mud, the engine spinning uselessly, unable to move even a meter. On its right side, the sloped armor panel was bent inward by the shockwave. The comms antenna was snapped in half. The forward sensor suite had gone dark, leaving only a few blinking lights on the control panel. Two Russian soldiers crawled out of the BTR, panicked, covered in mud, and completely disoriented. The result: 14 out of 15 vehicles removed from Russian service. Nearly 90 Russian infantry killed or critically wounded. More than $10 million in Russian equipment destroyed by a kamikaze UAV swarm worth under $40,000. The ambush ended, and the logistics route feeding the Huliaipol front was severed instantly. The burned-out convoy blocked the T-0401 entirely, rendering the route unusable for at least a week. Russian engineers would need recovery trucks, cranes, EOD teams, and security escorts, all of which required time to move from the rear. Until then, the T-0401 was treated as a red zone. No Russian unit dared approach with the threat of another Ukrainian UAV strike. As a result, Russia's entire offensive axis toward Huliaipol slowed exponentially. Artillery units ran low on shells, firing rates plummeted. Frontline infantry received no food, water, or medical supplies. Orlan 10 reconnaissance UAVs had no batteries or spare parts. Electronic warfare teams received no replacement modules. On a battlefield like Huliaipol, where Russia was trying to crush Ukrainian defenses through constant pressure, losing logistics for even a single day was enough to break the tempo. 2 days without resupply could halt the assault entirely. Ukraine's ambush did more than destroy a convoy. It broke Russia's entire offensive rhythm toward Huliaipol at the exact moment they needed momentum most. At 4:55 a.m. over the Black Sea, the electronic intelligence ship Ivan Kurs, a Project 18,280 class vessel of the Russian Navy, was patrolling its usual route over the Black Sea, roughly 86 miles north of the Bosporus Strait. But Kiev had no intention of negotiating. According to reports cited by Pravda and Militarny, the available information, photographs, and video footage all confirm that the Ivan Kurs sustained severe damage from a series of coordinated Ukrainian strikes. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had already mapped the patrol pattern of the 4,000-ton reconnaissance ship. Behind the cover of a routine patrol, the vessel served a far greater purpose: the silent shield protecting Moscow's last lifeline, two strategic gas pipelines running under the Black Sea, Turkish Stream and Blue Stream. For a Russian economy suffocating under sanctions, those lines were the final veins still pumping life into the system. Together, Turkish Stream and Blue Stream move up to 48 billion cubic meters of gas a year, generating nearly $20 billion annually. Money that keeps Russia's exhausted banks breathing. The Kremlin knows one immutable truth: whoever controls the pipelines controls Russia's last foothold in Europe. That is why, at 5:10 a.m. on October 25th, 3 Ukrainian kamikaze USVs were already closing in on the central Black Sea, just 12 miles from Ivan Kurs. They were Magura 5.5s, lethal unmanned surface vessels built specifically for asymmetric warfare. Each craft measured about 6 meters long, cruised at 50 miles per hour, and could travel more than 620 miles without refueling. Their ability to coordinate in formation made them the nightmare of the Russian fleet. Their hulls, made from epoxy composites, fiberglass, and carbon fiber, were coated in radar diffusive paint, rendering them nearly invisible against the sea's radar clutter. On Russian surveillance screens, they were nothing but faint static, indistinguishable from the waves themselves. They had departed Odessa Bay at midnight, launched from a covert GUR platform. While crossing through the radar envelope of Crimea's S-400 systems, everything unfolded exactly as planned. No response, no detection, no alert. At the 91N6E radar station of the S-400 battery near Sevastopol, the operators carried on as usual. They had no idea their screens had already been deceived. A few even poured the first shots of vodka for the morning shift. On the radar displays, everything looked perfectly normal. But out at sea, the 3 USVs skimmed the waves, holding a steady 50 miles per hour. No radio signal, no emissions, no warning. At 6.2 miles out, Ivan Kurs had slipped into a radar blind spot, completely outside the protection rings of Russia's defense grid. The pride of Russia's naval intelligence fleet now had only its navigation radar and a few light machine guns to face 3 suicide drones carrying over 1,980 pounds of explosives. No alarms sounded, no orders were given. It was just another quiet morning, until everything changed. At 5:18 a.m., Ivan Kurs maintained its routine course through low visibility and dim dawn light. Navigation radar showed no anomalies. No one on deck noticed the 3 incoming shadows slicing through the sea. Beneath the surface, the 3 Magura V5s advanced in a triangular assault formation. 1 led the strike, while 2 flanked to the left and right like the blades of a spinning rotor, spaced 980 feet apart. Their speed was 4 times faster than the Russian ships. Their hulls skimmed less than 3 feet above the water, leaving no radar echo, no radio trail, no foaming wake. The range fell to 5 miles, but the Russian crew still hadn't reacted. Surface radar detected nothing. The drones' returns were buried inside the ocean's natural interference. The antenna arrays didn't turn. The scopes remained clean. No one raised binoculars. No one stood ready at the guns. The left flank drone suddenly veered off course, creating a false radar trace to draw attention. The central drone locked its heading straight at the hull, aiming between the engine compartment and the communications room, where the ship's SIGINT array was concentrated. A faint blip flickered across Ivan Kurs' radar. Brief, unclear. A technician leaned forward, staring at the screen, but the echo disappeared after 2 sweeps. He logged it as sea clutter. No reason for alarm. For the first time, the ship's infrared camera picked up a faint image, a low-profile object slicing the surface, leaving a thin white trail, speed unknown, target unclassified, no order to fire. The portside gunner turned his head and saw it. Black, low, and moving impossibly fast, nothing like a fishing boat. He raised his finger to the trigger of the 14.5mm gun, but there was still no command to open fire. The bridge descended into confusion. Radar now displayed 3 simultaneous approach vectors. No more doubt, no more time. The alarm finally blared. The starboard gunner unlocked the breach, but with sea-skimming targets, effective range was near 0. The first burst of tracers screamed across the water and missed. The lead Magura 5-5 switched to terminal attack mode, throttling up to 56 miles per hour and charging straight for the hull. The other 2 swung wide, executing a cross-strike maneuver to split the ship's defensive fire. Distance dropped below 980 feet. The lead drone tilted its bow, aligning for a direct impact vector. Mounted on its nose was a directional warhead weighing 660 pounds, pre-programmed for a ram and detonate strike. Inside Ivan Kurz, alarm still screamed as the gunners scrambled for control. The firing order came too late. Survival time now counted in seconds. The 14.5mm barrels swung sluggishly, the target too small, too fast, hugging the sea surface. Impossible to lock on. The Magura No. 1 punched through the first burst of fire. A round tore the composite hull but did not deflect it. The USV's hull trembled, but its speed did not drop. On the starboard quarter, Magura No. 2 approached from the right flank, a crossing angle strike, simulating a secondary spear to draw fire away from the main axis. The deck-mounted machine gun swept instinctively and sprayed rounds and scored no hits. Magura No. 3 drove straight for the stern, where the ELINT antenna cluster, satellite navigation suites, and the ship's high data mast were concentrated. All 3 USVs were now inside approximately 100 meters range. "Cease fire! Prepare for impact!" rang out, but it was too late. Magura No. 1 rammed the port side, directly beneath the bridge. The impact sensor triggered and sent the detonation signal to the warhead. Immediate initiation. A white-orange fireball bloomed across the sea. Peak overpressure slammed laterally into the hull, producing a penetration effect nearly equal to approximately 1,000 kilograms of TNT, tearing open the second deck and ripping antenna arrays from their mounts. Magura No. 3 struck the stern. The blast hit the auxiliary engine room and the main power distribution trunk. The shock broke the No. 1 drive shaft. Flames began to crawl out of the machinery spaces. The ship listed slightly to starboard. Magura No. 2, despite taking 2 rounds, held its course. It skimmed past the first blast, swung in from the starboard, and punched through into the SIGINT receiver bank. The third detonation followed. A fire column taller than approximately 30 meters climbed skyward, snapping the main radar mast and shredding the radio room. Flames lanced through the hull and into the reserve fuel tanks. The entire ELINT SIGINT antenna suite was destroyed. The main electrical bus lost power. Water began flooding the decks as the ship listed. Emergency dewatering pumps engaged, but the pumps were dead. Black smoke rose from 2 burning points in the hull. The midships deck was catastrophically deformed by shock, warped and fractured. A naval officer was thrown overboard. His fate unknown. On the sea, fires still burned. Ivan Kurz lost all contact with Fleet Command. The main mast had been sheared off, the satellite transmitter melted, and military band radios answered nothing. Emergency control fell back to signal lamps and mechanical horns. Fire spread from impact point 2 into the auxiliary power room, igniting lithium battery racks and high-voltage cabling. A small secondary explosion occurred, not massive, but it created an internal overpressure that blew sealed doors in the central engineering compartment. Black smoke began to push into the portside service corridors. Underdeck visibility collapsed. The semi-automatic firefighting system activated, but water mains had been ruptured by the third blast. The engineering watch reported the engine room was flooded, water pouring in fast through a hull breach below the waterline. The ship's list oscillated, bulkhead pressures rose, warning of imminent structural failure if balanced pumping was not restored within the next 2 minutes. Far off, from the Podlet K-1 coastal radar near Sevastopol, command began to lose a coherent signal lock on the ship's hull. Telemetry faded to a single indeterminate thermal dot approximately 12 kilometers from the vessel's original position. Ivan Kurz, the Black Sea Fleet's premier electronic reconnaissance center, no longer had combat capability, no comms, no realistic chance of independent survival. A few life rafts auto-deployed. 8 crew able to move clambered to the uppermost deck, but the heat let them stand in place for no more than 30 seconds at a time. The sinking of Ivan Kurs was not merely a preemptive strike of firepower, it was a strategic knockout to Russia's Black Sea early warning architecture. The fleet's long-range electronic collection capability, centered on Project 18280, was severed instantly. The single node that allowed the Black Sea Fleet to cue land-based S-400 radars, monitor UAVs and USVs, and designate remote targets for Crimea's air defenses was neutralized in under 10 minutes. In a sea where surface warships were forced to hide and coastal radars were continually disrupted by drones, Ivan Kurs had been the Kremlin's last open eye. Now it lay burning and black. Moscow's response followed the wartime control of information playbook. No images, no confirmations, no public mourning. The only line from the Russian Ministry of Defense spoke of a repelled USV attack, no damage reported. 3 days later, satellite imagery showed a charred patch of sea over approximately 300 square meters with no trace of the reconnaissance ship. Rather than admit loss, Russia chose concealment. On the ground, however, the Black Sea had lost a critical tactical anchor. No official statement, no press conference, no footage of the USV launch. That was all Ukraine left behind after one of the Black Sea's most effective asymmetric strikes since the war began. No medals, no operator photos, no one to claim credit. For Kyiv, the attack was not for show. It was a reminder that in any stretch of water Russia deems safe, at any distance its radars assume secure, and at any hour when Russian crews think they can drink vodka on shift, knives under the surface are still moving, silently, relentlessly. Amid the thick fog blanketing Ukraine's eastern border, nearly 60 Russian armored vehicles carrying 400 troops, 75 tons of munitions and weapons were quietly spreading across the blood-soaked fields southwest of Kostiantynivka. According to Euromaidan, Russia's largest armored assault of the autumn has failed near Volodymyrivka. Hoping to exploit poor weather conditions, Russian forces launched 2 attack waves, driving straight into a deadly gauntlet of mines, explosives, and Ukrainian ambushes. What was meant to be a breakthrough turned into a massacre of tanks and armored vehicles, buried in mud and fire. None of them knew every mile forward was a step closer to a death trap carefully set by Kyiv. A stretch of soft terrain that seemed harmless, a natural mud basin, had turned into a killing pit after weeks of rain. The already weak soil was now soaked with water, mud, and buried TM-62 anti-tank mines waiting beneath. At 5:35 a.m., October 27, 2025, 4 Leleka 100 reconnaissance UAVs sliced across the front in a wide arc, gliding low over the ridgelines, their infrared optics scanning the entire sector. One of them picked up a heat signature, and the 93rd Brigade's command screen lit up. At a radius of 1.8 miles, 30 combat vehicles, T-72B3M tanks, BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles, and MTLB armored transports were silently advancing toward Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. They had just exited the electronic warfare zone, beyond the cover of surveillance radars and Lear-3 jammers, exposed in a shallow valley with no terrain to hide behind. This wasn't just a convoy. It was an entire axis of advance, armed well enough to turn 4 Ukrainian villages into Russian colonies. Inside were nearly 200 troops, tank crews, infantry, medics, and logistics men. Over 250 personal weapons, rifles, grenade launchers, ATGMS, mortars, and sidearms. More than 44 tons of ammunition, 125mm shells, 30mm autocannon rounds, and rifle cartridges, alongside combat unmanned aerial vehicles, night vision gear, radios, GPS units, mine detectors, and field-grade demolition tools. It was an adrenaline of adrenaline and gunpowder, injected straight into the bloodstream of the Kostiantynivka front. At 5:42 a.m., the lead T-72B3M rounded a narrow bend. Its track suddenly sank deep into soft ground. Vehicles behind swerved to avoid collision, but within yards, they too bogged down, trapped in a 60-meter stretch of liquid earth. The natural mud trap had sprung shut. Engines roared. Tracks spun wildly but went nowhere. Turrets rotated helplessly as if the machines themselves were fighting the ground. An MTLB tried to edge around, but made it only 50 feet before a violent blast tore it apart. The vehicle was hurled sideways, flames bursting from underneath. It had struck a TM-62 mine. In less than 10 seconds, the entire column was paralyzed. Tanks bogged down up front, a burning MTLB in the middle, and a tail jammed tight between two hills, unable to turn or retreat. 3 T-72B3Ms lay dead in the mud, turrets frozen mid-turn, tracks clawing uselessly at the ground. Behind them, 4 or 5 BMP-2s piled together, scraping armor as crews panicked, firing wildly into the tree lines. Blind, desperate, expecting an ambush. What they didn't know, the ambush had already begun, from above. The chaos was suffocating. Every second of death was being recorded. Flames from the MTLB wreck, footprints of soldiers leaping into the sludge, all of it streamed in real time, encrypted and sent to the 93rd Brigade's command post just 6.2 miles away. Inside a bunker beneath Pokrovsky village, the Ukrainian artillery commander squinted at his monitor. Data clean, coordinates confirmed. The order was issued over a secure channel. On the northwestern gun line, 2 S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzers and M777 towed guns elevated their barrels, autoloaders turning gently. The first shells were ready. Fire mission in under 3 minutes. Within 12 seconds, the first salvo screamed across the horizon. The signature whistle of a heavy barrage fired from over 9.3 miles out. The northern sky lit up like dawn. 4 155mm rounds slammed into the cluster of BMP-2s at the center of the formation. One vehicle erupted instantly, its rear door blown open, hull torn apart. Russian soldiers trapped inside were shredded as 30mm shells inside cooked off, detonating one after another. The second volley struck 2 MTLBs trying to reverse. Both exploded in a thunderous roar. One chassis was launched off the road, creating a crater that blocked any escape. The other caught fire, ignited by the ammunition belts stored within. Russian troops began bailing out, not to fight, but to survive. They dove into ditches, rolled into mud, hid behind burning wrecks. But the plumes of smoke rising above them turned the entire stretch into a kill zone, perfectly visible through infrared cameras. The third barrage landed on the rear column. One shell hit the supply carrier dead center. The secondary explosion was massive, a fireball rising 330 feet high, painting the hillside blood red. In just 7 minutes of concentrated fire, the once tight Russian formation was shattered into 3 isolated pockets. Command broken, comms down, movement impossible. And that was only the opening act. The 93rd Brigade switched to target elimination phase, deploying FPV kamikaze drones in swarms of 3. From 2 hidden launch points inside the orchards 1.8 miles away, 14 FPV 5-inch drones armed with RPG-7 and OG-7 warheads lifted off, hugging the treetops to evade short-range radar and jamming. Below, Russian infantry broke into chaos. UAV-03 banked left, then dove, slamming into the flank of a BMP with a cage turret right at its weak armor seam. The blast scattered black smoke and shards of steel. UAV-06 skimmed the ground, darted beneath an MTLB, and detonated under the ammo bay. The explosion gutted the entire hull. Up front, 2 T-72B3Ms were still alive, their turrets wrapped in cope cages. But they were stuck, immobilized in the muck, unable to pivot or maneuver. The recon UAV circled and marked both targets. Seconds later, 2 155mm shells from the M77 screamed down. One struck the rear of tank number 7, blowing out its engine compartment. Moments after, a 122mm round from a Gvozdika found tank number 8, engulfing its turret in flames. The cope cage burned like a steel bird cage set ablaze. The entire roadway was now an inferno. Metal shattered, flames consuming armor. No cage could save anything. Through the UAV's thermal lens, the heat signatures of Russian vehicles flickered, then faded one by one. Fire finished what artillery and drones had started. The remaining vehicles either burned or were ripped apart by FPVs diving from the dark. Machine guns barked back into empty air, blind, useless. The entire 30-vehicle Russian column was annihilated. 17 major fires blazed along the route. Half the personnel were dead, bodies scattered among wrecks, ditches, and mud. Some clutched rifles never fired, others still carried assault maps in their vests. Above, the Leleka UAVs kept circling. Through their thermal optics, no more movement, no living heat. The battlefield had gone silent. But on the real-time map, the glow of 70 tons of burning steel still pulsed red in the night. Roughly 31 miles away, across the flatlands near Shakov and Volodymyrivka, a Shark reconnaissance UAV from Azov's 1st Corps picked up movement, a mechanized Russian assault column personally commanded under Putin's direct operational authority. Through the high-resolution electro-optical and thermal feed, the picture came alive. 8 T-72B 3 main battle tanks in the center, 12 BMP 2 infantry fighting vehicles forming twin flanks. Behind, 6 MTLBS under camouflage tarps carrying supplies and electronic gear, and trailing at the rear, 1 R-149MA, one command vehicle with a spiral antenna, plus 2 light transports bearing Belgorod military district plates. What they didn't know, the low, muddy road they were crawling across, slick with rain and clay, was a trap, one carefully built overnight by Azov's engineers. On the UAV operator's screen, the Azov commander pressed a single key. Target tagged. They're in the trap. Below, the Russian column rolled on, slow, heavy, unaware that in minutes, the ground beneath their tracks would erupt. The 4th BMP reached the center of the low ground when a sharp, dry blast shattered the morning silence. A TM-62 anti-tank mine detonated directly beneath it. The vehicle jolted sideways, tracks shredded, the turret thrown off alignment, a burst of red flame venting from the burning engine bay. Within 10 seconds, the lead T-72B3 on the left track bogged down, its front end sinking deep into liquefied soil. The engine roared, but the whole hull only slid sideways, then froze, swallowed whole by the earth. The 3rd tank slammed its brakes too late, skidding into the side of the lead vehicle. The entire left lane was blocked. The command vehicle at the rear sent out a frantic call. "Stop! Mines! Mud! We're stuck!" But by then, radio waves carried nothing useful. The response came too late. Above them, the Shark UAV tilted slightly, its camera sweeping slowly from front to rear. More than 180 Russian troops, 30 tons of weapons, gear, and ammunition, now trapped in a pit of mud. Inside Azov's forward command dugout, the commander's voice came through the static. Calm, decisive. Target locked. Call Bravo. FPVS up. Artillery fire. From behind the tree lines, the hum began. Dozens of FPV drones spinning to life. On the feed, the Shark UAV recorded clusters of Azov-1 FPV strike drones advancing toward the target zone. They flew just above the treetops, splitting into 4 attack wings, 3 to 5 drones each, armed with RPG-7, OG-7, or fragmented 82mm rounds strapped precisely to 5 to 7-inch carbon frames. On the ground, Azov infantry was ready. 3 assault elements, Alpha, Delta, and Omega, emerged from birch groves, wrapping around the southern edge of Volodymyrivka and the western lip of the valley. Each team, 10 to 12 operators, lightly armed but lethal, RPG-7s, RGW-90s, M240B machine guns, and NATO standard sidearms. The first wave of FPVS struck the BMP-2 cluster in the center of the Russian formation. BMP-6 took a direct hit. An OG-7 drone penetrated the turret gap. The explosion blew the rear hatch open. Flames engulfed the crew compartment. From the west, another FPV dove diagonally into the side of T-72B3 number 4, right between the 2nd and 3rd road wheels. The blast ripped off its reactive armor plate and snapped the track. Then, Alpha Team opened up. An RPG-7 slammed into a retreating MTLB, igniting its rear section. Russian troops leapt out, only to be cut down instantly by a PKM burst sweeping across the flank. To the north, Omega Team advanced through a drainage ditch under cover of M18 smoke grenades, closing in on the BMPs at the rear. In less than 40 seconds, 2 vehicles were destroyed with shoulder-fired weapons, a 3rd hit in the rear ramp by an FPV dive. The Russian column disintegrated into chaos. They couldn't tell where the enemy was or where to run. They saw no Ukrainians, only drones and incoming fire from every direction. There was no time to call for help. The Pol 21 jamming station Azov had hidden in the forest ridge had already fried their comms. Then came the first artillery salvo. Two S-1 Gvozdikas began hammering the road. The UAVs painted targets, and the battlefield bloomed into a furnace. From the north, Azov mechanized infantry, mounted in IMV Cossacks and BTR-4s, fanned out in a semicircle. A light weapons platoon reached the ridge, firing RPG-7V2s, AGS-17 grenade launchers, and PKM machine guns, pinning down any Russian crew that dared fight back. Over the tactical frequency, the Azov commander's tone was ice cold. Focus on the center group. Cut the command chain. Bravo UAVs. Strike the command vehicle. Artillery, third salvo. A strange new roar cut through the chaos. From above, dark shapes plunged down. Paratroopers, Ukrainian airborne operators, part of the Azov 1 airborne detachment, had just fast-roped from Mi-8 MSBV helicopters, landing behind the trapped convoy. They immediately fanned out, forming a three-pronged cordon between the rice fields and the sparse woods. Azov infantry pressed close on the immobilized BMPs, trying to traverse their turrets. Before they could fire, two RPG-7s detonated simultaneously along the thin side armor. BMP-9 and BMP-11 went up in flames. The R-149MA-1 command vehicle, ordered to retreat, rolled straight into the sights of a mobile Ukrainian gun crew hidden 1.2 miles away. A 122mm HE round slammed into its antenna bay, obliterating the comms module. The Russian command link went completely dead. As dawn mist lifted over the flooded fields southwest of Shakov, the scene resembled hell on earth. 29 Russian vehicles reduced to smoldering heaps of steel. The T-72B3 No. 3 burned from the inside out, ammunition cooking off in the turret, lying among shattered rice stalks. Fragments of ERA bricks lay buried like broken blades in the mud. Tracks, turrets, armor plates, all scattered. The TM-62 mine detonations having achieved maximum destructive effect. In total, 58 armored vehicles, tanks, IFVs, and transports were destroyed or abandoned. An estimated 320 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded, with 140 to 160 confirmed dead on site. This wasn't just a failed assault, it was proof that Russia's vaunted electronic warfare, UAV surveillance, and mechanized tactics were fracturing. The southern Kostiantynivka line was now exposed. Russian forces struggling to hold Chasiv Yar, Klishchivka, and Andriivka were forced to pull units back to plug the gap. Logistics routes had to be rerouted, stretching supply lines, exposing positions, and bleeding Moscow's front dry. On October 24th, Ukraine executed an unprecedented strike plan, not against a fixed military base, not targeting a power plant. This time, the aim was to direct US-supplied HIMARS rockets straight at the Belgorod Dam, a critical node capable of crippling Russia's strategic logistics in the Kharkiv border region. The next morning, the governor of Belgorod in Russia was forced to speak out. The dam had been partially destroyed, water was spilling downstream. If strikes continue, flash flooding is inevitable. The attack plan began with 4 Lelika 100 reconnaissance UAVs, penetrating deep through Russian air defenses with centimeter-level targeting accuracy. 2 successfully infiltrated and precisely identified the positions of field camps and major ammunition dumps. Assets with an estimated total value near $5 billion, distributed within a 15-mile radius around the Belgorod Dam. Leica sensor feeds were live to the SSO command. One of the key targets was a frontline ammunition depot, holding 4,500 tons of 122mm artillery rounds, mortar rounds, tank rounds, small arms ammunition, and thousands of man-portable Igla missiles. That stockpile was sufficient to sustain 2 divisions' fire for 10 continuous days, accompanied by dozens of armored logistics trucks, Ural and Kamaz. awaiting orders to move toward the Kupiansk-Vovchansk axis. Not stopping there, just a few kilometers downstream of the dam sat Belgorod 22, a tactical nuclear weapons storage complex belonging to Unit 25624. One of the Soviet-era Object 400 installations, located roughly 10 miles from the border, still active today. The main structure contained 3 deep underground vaults, each storing 30 to 40 tactical warheads. Total estimated stock approximately 100 tactical warheads, the types compatible with Iskander-M, Kaliber, and KH-101 delivery systems. Yield per warhead ranged from 5 to 150 kilotons. The whole area guarded by 150 Russian soldiers garrisoned at an open field camp near the secondary entrance. If the dam were to fail catastrophically, water would sweep down the Siversky Donets, overwhelm spillways, and drown the entire logistics network, ammunition dumps, and Russia's nuclear assets in the Belgorod area. This would not be mere supply denial, it would be an asymmetric strategic strike at the Kremlin's covert tactical weapons. The command center display lit up the tactical map, 3 weak points on the dam marked in red: the spillway gates, the downstream tow, the concrete earth interface. If all 3 points were struck simultaneously, the approximately 980-foot dam structure would not withstand the resonant hydraulic pressure plus blast overpressure, and the dam's body would almost certainly collapse in sections, producing an irrecoverable breach. At Velika Pisarivka village, Sumy Oblast, 46 miles from the target, 7th Artillery Brigade's HIMARS unit had emplaced 6 HIMARS M31, a 1-block IA rockets, delivered from the United States 3 days earlier, stood ready on their rails. The distance to the target lay well within the system's optimal effective range, ensuring absolute precision. Target coordinates were preloaded into the launcher's fire control core via the militarized Starlink satellite network. Positioning data was updated every 0.5 seconds from a reconnaissance UAV loitering at only 1,640 feet above the dam, using thermal cameras and semi-active laser. A single fire order passed over encrypted UHF internal channels. The 27th digital crew verified parameters: combustion chamber pressure, guidance axis, inertial data. 6 rockets left the rails, each carrying the stamp of American aid and the launch techniques and defiant spirit of Kyiv. Solid fuel motors burned continuously, accelerating the rockets to top speed. The rockets quickly climbed to a cruise altitude of 49,000 feet. Velocity peaked near Mach 3.0. Active control surfaces adjusted continuously using dual-layer INS and GPS guidance. The flight path shaped as a low-cone profile, denying ground radar reaction time. Russian radars had less than 15 seconds to detect, track, and lock. On the command center's main screen, time to impact 85 seconds. If not intercepted, all 6 rockets would simultaneously strike 3 fatal weak points on the dam. Each hit carried an armor-piercing warhead weighing over 220 pounds, leaving no defensive option. But the dam was not the true target. Kyiv did not aim at inert concrete. Kyiv aimed at the military logistics ecosystem Russia had built around it. Field camps, ammunition depots, transfer nodes, and transport corridors, all directly servicing Moscow's invasion campaign from the Kharkiv-Kupiansk axis. If the entire zone were severed, if the ground became an impassable flooded wasteland, 4,600 tons of materiel, nearly $5 billion worth, would not reach the front line. They would drown or be abandoned, immobile. Moscow's supply units, instead of moving directly to the front, would be forced to reroute or get bogged down attempting to bridge flooded sectors. Resupply rates would drop below half, new routes would double in length, and exposure to UAV ambushes and guided artillery would spike. Dozens of daily logistics lanes would be cut or delayed. Land routes, pontoon bridges, refueling nodes, submerged under 10 feet of mud and water. Meanwhile, frontline Russian units would exhaust their on-hand reserves, losing redundancy and rapid resupply capability. And even if convoys reached the front, the units meant to receive them might no longer exist. Late logistics would be funerals, not reinforcements. At 4:03 a.m., 6 attack axes had just punched through Russia's early warning radar layer. The 91N6E and 96L6 surveillance radars gave no early warning. No radar returns, no cue fed down to lower-tier air defense systems. The Russian air defense net was pierced at the first layer. Pantsir did not react. Tor M2 received no target data. Buk M3 remained silent. At the Regional Air Defense Command in Belgorod, screens remained blank. No unit realized 6 precision-guided cruise rockets, each carrying a destructive warhead, were inbound at 3 times the speed of sound. From border crossing time, the 6 HIMARS had less than 20 seconds to impact. At the Belgorod Air Defense Control Center, the atmosphere remained calm. The radar sweep continued its steady rotation, but no high-level alert was present. The night shift had just changed. One poured coffee, one opened a map. A familiar tableau, domestic airspace, a quiet night. No one knew that on the other side of the border, 6 HIMARS rockets were screaming toward the target, now less than 19 miles away. But only seconds later, the main radar screen flickered with a faint return. A strange trace appeared, then vanished within ground clutter interference. The technician assumed it was a metallic bird, or a false echo from the lower band layer. Then the signal reappeared. Its intensity rose sharply. The alert level jumped to stage 3. The shift commander leaned closer to the display, and the internal alarm erupted. Inbound ordnance detected, Mach 3 speed, red alert. The tracking radar barely locked on before all 6 heat signatures crossed the interception boundary. Every missile was already in terminal phase, descending at near vertical angles. There was no time to respond. In less than 8 seconds, the entire Air Defense Center heard only a single rising scream. Then the first detonations roared as 6 rockets slammed into the Belgorod Dam. 3 struck the main spillway gate cluster. The first 2 penetrated the 3.2-foot thick concrete. The third exploded directly at the hydraulic control shaft. The gate system was torn apart. Water from the reservoir surged downward. Pressure spiked beyond design limits. Every floodgate flipped open. The spillway discharged at full bore. The next 2 warheads hit the downstream toe, burrowing deep into compacted soil before exploding inside, creating 32-foot craters and toppling hundreds of tons of earth and reinforced structure. The reverse erosion effect began instantly. The current found its path and devoured everything that tried to hold it back. The final missile slammed into the concrete earth junction, the dam's weakest seam. That blast carved a fracture running along the body like a slash wound, widening into a leak, and then into a torrent. Within 60 seconds, hydraulic pressure from the reservoir began ripping the dam apart from within. Each second, over 1,000 cubic meters of water poured downstream. Russia's defensive line wasn't attacked, it was drowned. No sirens, no air defense, no return fire, only water, pressure, collapse. The first surge at a rate exceeding 1,000 cubic meters per second. Within a minute, the flow doubled. The raw force from the reservoir formed a 980-foot-long water wall, nearly 13 feet high, racing along the lower Siversky Donets channel. The first target struck, the northern frontline ammunition depot, less than 1.8 miles from the dam. 20 warehouse rows, packed with artillery shells, supply trucks, and diesel tanks. No wall was built to withstand direct hydraulic impact. The leading wave slammed into warehouse number 5, where 152-millimeter shells were stacked. Wooden crates shattered, steel containers burst open. Thousands of shells swept away like drifting metal carcasses. The flood expanded southwest, touching the perimeter of the Belgorod 22 nuclear complex. The entire access tunnel to Vault 2, which led to the underground warhead chambers, flooded rapidly. Unit 25,624 issued a Level 1 nuclear security alert. All guards retreated inside. The hydraulic bulkhead doors sealed, 40 seconds before the water reached containment level. The Russian Logistics Brigade encampment, over 150 soldiers, was completely submerged. Tents, command trucks, field comms, and temporary relay stations were swallowed by mud and current. One artillery battery failed to evacuate, swept away entirely by the surge. The Belgorod-Vovchansk supply line was severed. Lowland dirt roads went under. All mechanized traffic halted. The steel temporary bridge at Transfer Point 3 collapsed halfway through its span. Convoys carrying fuel, shells stopped dead mid-route. Within 5 minutes, Russia's entire logistical network in the region was paralyzed. Not by bombs, not by artillery, by water and precision. The Belgorod-Shebekino-Vovchansk supply corridor, which ferried artillery shells, fuel, and vehicles for Russia's entire Kharkiv grouping, was cut off completely. Less than 10 minutes after the dam was destroyed, backup routes were forced into detours, stretching paths by 31 miles through high, open terrain right along the border. Territory constantly under short-range Ukrainian UAV patrol. Ambush risk tripled. The region's largest ammunition dump, 4,500 tons of artillery and manpads, was now unreachable. Russian artillery units on the Kupiansk and Svatove fronts began dropping fire rates from 500 rounds per day to under 180. Out of shells, long-range guns went silent. Supply crews were forced to ration remaining stock, daily quotas cut. The Eastern Kharkiv logistics cluster was effectively dead. Moscow's response: evasion, censorship, distortion. By the next morning, the Russian Defense Ministry issued no official statement. Only the Belgorod regional governor confirmed that a local dam was slightly damaged by Ukrainian shelling. No mention of HIMARS, no mention of flooding, no mention of military losses. Ukraine, no press briefing, no celebration, no official confirmation. Within the Ukrainian military, there was no victory toast. Only a staff assessment circulated from the general command. Belgorod-Vovchansk logistics corridor disabled for 5 to 7 days minimum. Estimated munitions rendered inoperable greater than 4,000 tons.
Dawn of September 11th, 2025. Exactly 4:50. With the sun still hidden over Zaporizhzhia, 12 Ukrainian loitering munitions UAVs lay tucked inside brush along the road line running through the town of Terpinya. A perfect electronic ambush had been strung across the primary logistics artery. Tokmak-Melitopol, the lifeline feeding the entire Russian grouping in the Zaporizhzhia battle space. And with a single signal, the supply route Moscow believed it fully controlled would evaporate right before their eyes. At 4:55, the Russian logistics convoy began to emerge. In a field command bunker buried on the outskirts of Orikhiv, 19 kilometers away. The technical team, codenamed Valkyrie 12 from the 65th Mechanized Infantry Brigade, glued their eyes to the electronic screens, tracking heat streams relayed by the FLIR Boson 320 pair mounted on Suicide UAV number 1. Thermal data built an almost perfectly accurate schematic of the convoy. 21 vehicles nose to tail resolved on the display. Heat patches burned through their camouflage, laying bare the truth inside the column 1.2 miles away. In the lead, Russia's classic MTLB armored carrier, 26,500 pounds of steel, with scouts aboard tasked to recon, sweep mines, and open the road. Immediately behind, 2 Ural 4 320 trucks, each carrying 20 Russian troops. A total of 40 soldiers packed tight in the beds with full weapons and personal kits. 6 Ural 4 320 hauling dozens of RPG-7 launch tubes, MANPADS, PKM, and PKT machine guns. In all, 13,250 pounds of weapons pushing straight for the front. 6 additional Ural tankers, each with a tank module swallowing 1,850 gallons of diesel. In total, 11,000 gallons of hot fuel glowing through 6mm steel walls. 5 Kamaz 5350s, each towing 15,500 pounds of explosive ordnance, 152mm, 122mm artillery shells, 120mm mortar rounds, and BM-2 rockets. Total, 77,100 pounds of ammunition, stark and obvious under the Boson 320's infrared. And capping the column, 1 UAZ 452 medical van and 1 BTR-80 armored car covering the withdrawal route. The math was brutal for Moscow. This fuel and ammunition sufficed to keep an entire Russian armor battalion attacking for a week. But in a few minutes, rather than flowing into red-hot gun barrels at the front, they would pour into a colossal firestorm that would devour Moscow's logistics line. The attack plan was no spur-of-the-moment raid. It was the result of weeks of continuous tracking by the recon and UAV crews of the 65th Mechanized Brigade. Once a week, like clockwork, Russia pushed a heavy supply convoy from Tokmak through Terpinya down to Melitopol to feed the southern front. Intelligence also indicated that today, on this very road where Ukraine had set its ambush, an exceptionally large convoy would run the resupply. At 4:58, the lead armored vehicle rolled into the trap zone. Squads of Russian soldiers swept the verges with nervous eyes for anything amiss. In the field command post, Valkyrie 12 held their breath at a cruel fork in the road. Strike now. Hit a handful of targets in a lightning blow, but spook the rest, giving the massive column a chance to bolt. Or stay hidden, patient, lure the convoy deep into the kill pocket. The risk of discovery climbed by the second, but the reward was annihilating the entire column, snuffing out the supply route outright. A plan, months in the making, now stared at the specter of failure. The decision was no mere arithmetic. This was psychology, information, and risk, trading immediate safety for strategic effect. The commander gave a single order: hold, keep waiting. Seconds later, the convoy kept rolling, seeing nothing unusual in the roadside thickets. The 12 UAVs remained motionless, distributed along both shoulders, 6 per side, buried in tall grass and berms. And here lay the terror of this strike: 12 10-inch frame FPV quadcopters built from a raft of Chinese components in a Kyiv workshop just days earlier. No longer mere drones, they had become 12 suicide troopers, ready to hurl themselves into the logistics column with removable body panels and a warhead zip-tied beneath the steel frame. The UAV pack lay deep in brush and weeds, like a pride of starved lions mashed to the earth, waiting for the one perfect instant to pounce. In their eyes, every block of steel, whether packed with shells, fuel, or men, could be turned into the perfect breakfast. Exactly 5 o'clock. The entire Russian column had entered the ambush box. There was no longer any path out. From the field post, the commander snapped a short command across the internal net. Fire! The technicians, glued to their FPV goggles, executed at once. All 12 UAVs spun up together. Motors that had waited too long now screamed awake. In an instant, the lions ripped through their cover and lunged at the prey on the road. Each Ukrainian-built FPV quad carried a modified PG-7VL warhead, 5.7 pounds, lashed tight under the belly. An 85mm copper conical-shaped charge designed to bore through the metal skin of specialty trucks, paired with 2.2 pounds of TNT, enough to turn Russia's moving steel into scrap. Seconds after the order, the first UAV leapt from the ground and speared the lead MTLB. 4 screaming rotors shoved it to 56 miles per hour, and the warhead detonated square into the MTLB's nose. The Russian crew in the cabin never had time to react. In a blink, the brutal impact blew through the armor, turning the spearhead command vehicle into a blackened block at 1,470 degrees Fahrenheit. The convoy stopped dead, the snake's head severed, the lead MTLB unable to steer, command links choked, the following vehicles tumbling into standstill without a guide point. Under 15 seconds later, 2 more UAVs burst from the brush. They drove hard for the fuel tankers. At 62 miles per hour, at this range, nothing could stop them. The PG-7VL punched deep into tanker hulls and detonated, tearing apart tens of tons of steel structure. Secondary explosions bloomed, birthing a massive fireball at 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Smoke columns surged hundreds of meters high. Fragments flung 490 feet. Blast overpressure heaved nearby vehicles. The dominoes began to fall. This is the hallmark of coordinated strikes. The initial target needn't be the highest value, but if fuel or ammunition is triggered, consequences multiply exponentially. Here, a fuel depot in motion went critical in seconds, shifting the tactical landscape from a moving column into a blazing kill zone where every enemy action was interrupted. At 5:01:53, the second wave commenced. 3 FPV suicide drones took orders together, rotors flensing the air, driving into KAMAZ 5350S loaded with artillery rounds. Impact punched through the canvas roofs, detonating in the heart of the cargo beds. Instantly, hundreds of 152mm and 122mm shells cooked off in a chain, secondary explosions rippling non-stop. For a time, the zone became untouchable. Continuous blasts, flashing bursts, and shredding shrapnel made any rescue attempt meaningless. Troops within the envelope were hurled, disoriented, their defensive organization collapsing. The script escalated. UAV number 7 slammed into a Ural 4320 troop truck, splintering the bed. Mass casualties. Any coherent counterfire evaporated. At 5:03, the convoy had sunk into chaos. Medics in the UAZ 452 bailed out with rifles to return fire. But it was already too late. An FPV screamed through the tracer stream and drove straight into the van's nose. On impact, the UAZ 452 shuddered violently, then burst into a blinding fire halo. Blast pressure blew doors clean off, hurling red-hot shards across the road. The remaining vehicles were trapped mid-route, the MTLB's carcass blocking the head, while the BTR-80 in the rear had yet to traverse its turret. The Ukrainian commander spoke calmly. "Continue. Clean them out." The last 4 UAVs tore loose like finishing daggers. Each chose its own victim, a fuel tanker, a weapons hauler, anything whose engine still growled. What began as scattered bangs merged into a single convulsive roar, 4 killing strokes severing the last diesel heart still gasping. A shrill screech, then the earth hammered. Giant fireballs rose, swallowing vehicles whole in a heartbeat. Shockwaves swept like sledges, blasting soil and flinging razor fragments in all directions. Flame jetted skyward, corkscrewing like a vortex. At 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, the air itself warped, turning the battle space into a blazing inferno. In minutes, all 21 vehicles of the Russian logistics column became towering torches, devoured by a crimson sea of fire. Black smoke coiled in giant columns, hundreds of meters tall. Flames so bright, civilians in Melitopol could see the glow from afar. In under 5 minutes, a convoy prepared for days, worth millions of dollars, had been turned into a cemetery of steel by a passing lion pride. As black smoke from charred hulks boiled over Terpinya, the message was unmistakable. Russia had just lost one of its largest logistics convoys in weeks. Of the 21 vehicles, not a single one remained operable. Burning fuel tanks turned the road into a lake of fire. Shells detonating in sequence flung stone and dirt, leaving craters and shrapnel fields hundreds of meters around. Survivors were either grievously wounded or fled in panic, abandoning the entire military train. The blow meant Russian units along Tokmak, Robotyne, Verbov would face severe shortages of artillery rounds and fuel for days. Without resupply, barrage tempo would drop sharply, and mechanized elements would struggle to mount further counterattacks. More importantly, the entire Tokmak-Melitopol axis, the so-called artery, had been proven vulnerable to Ukraine's low-cost FPV swarms. It proved a simple truth to the world. Even with tanks, artillery, and dozens of air defense complexes, Russia is helpless against homemade drones costing mere hundreds of dollars. For Ukraine, the ambush was proof of the 1,000 cuts strategy. No need for a single knockout blow. Through relentless pinpoint strikes, Russian logistics can be bled to paralysis. The message landed. Every Russian convoy, no matter how large, is a target. Modern war has entered a new era where cheap UAVs can change the fate of an entire battlefield. Pre-dawn, September 12, 2025, at 0000, a single tiered operation. three layers in concert: mass feints, electronic warfare suppression, and a final assassin strike package to slip past air defenses and hit Primorsk oil port on the Baltic was set in motion. At 0010, UAV groups lifted off from multiple launch sites in Ukraine. Takeoff was layered: 200 decoys, AQ-400 and various home-built 10-inch steel frame quadcopters, plus 30 primary strike UAVs of the AN-196 Luti type, all fueled and green-checked. Orders: minimal radio emissions, strict radio silence. The swarms flew low, terrain masking while constantly updating digital terrain maps. Some AQ-400s and AN-196s, on first entering Russian airspace at the border, started emitting faint radar signatures. Autopilots trimmed their tracks. At 0025, a NABO-M long-range radar reported anomalies. Hundreds of low-level returns pressing toward Russian territory from the south, detection stretches spanning hundreds of kilometers. Alerts went to the Leningrad Oblast Air Defense Command. Most of the UAV mass kept radio silence, hugging terrain, then began light EW pings to probe Russian reactions. At 2:10, the decoy clusters neared St. Petersburg and districts around the target area. S-400, Panzer, book sites at multiple locations picked up scattered small returns. S-400s immediately fired several long-range missiles into the faint bands. Panzer batteries hosed 30mm fire at low contacts. Operator crews began to drown in screens. The air defense riposte slaughtered most of Ukraine's decoys. At 3:20, the AN-196 main strike package began shifting from masked crews to the final approach. More decoys went down, losses budgeted to soak up missiles and time. Regional Russian IADS reported multiple kills, convincing command that most of the threat had been neutralized. A N-196 split into terminal attack groups. Terrain recon confirmed the attack window: ultra-low altitude, sea horizon ingress to exploit radar line-of-sight limits from Earth's curvature. At 4:35, Primorsk air defenses abruptly spotted fresh small returns at very short range. A quayside Panzer flipped to autotrack and brought 30mm guns online. Local missile batteries salvoed at the dots. But 10 minutes later, the main blow landed. The first AN-196 kamikaze cluster plowed into the pump station and control house. One smashed the control building, thermobaric warhead generating crushing overpressure, collapsing structure, and killing control logic. Others went for the main pipeline manifold, cracking joints, forcing leaks, and propagating fires. Immediately after, the remaining strike elements targeted 2 oil tankers berthed at the quays. One UAV punched in near the bridge section, blacking out command. Another drilled into a cargo tank, initiating a major fire and fuel spill. At 4:48, local air defenses kept firing, but too late to prevent penetration. Missile stocks had been bled by hundreds of decoys. Some Panzer shots hit UAVs, yet penetrators were already inside the perimeter. Power and control systems for the port were shredded. Close valve commands never reached the plant. Primorsk fell into flames, 2 large tankers on fire, the pump farm destroyed, and the main line leaking. Port firefighters and suppression teams moved in, but whole sectors kept detonating, rendered unsafe by blazing fuel and gas. Commercial satellites snapped the scene, debris fields, a colossal smoke column. Nearby airports triggered emergency plans. Several flights were diverted. The operation accepted heavy attrition in cheap decoys to open the gate for the main package. Primorsk, a massive oil export mouth, sank into a sea of fire. Damage to multiple pump stations and 2 tankers significantly reduced export capacity, disrupting the covert oil sale chain and directly striking war revenues. Russia's vaunted multi-layered air defense web still has pressure points against a very large UAV swarm deployed intelligently, especially low-flying, sea-skimming threats that exploit the radar horizon. Mission complete.
At 4:15 a.m., January 13th, 2026, in the port city of Taganrog, still largely asleep, no one knew that the most critical link in Russia's UAV production chain was about to disappear from the battlefield map. The UAV manufacturing plant on the city's outskirts, producing 1,500 large UAVs annually, was operating on its usual routine. This was not a storage site. It was the heart of the entire production chain. And the entire factory complex had already been locked into the unblinking gaze of Ukraine's Shark Reconnaissance UAV. 93 miles away, at a field launch site disguised as a civilian logistics area east of Zaporizhzhia, a mobile TL launcher stood ready. Ukrainian Navy coastal missile operators had completed final preparations inside the fire control vehicle. Target designation radar, fused with reconnaissance UAV data, was firmly locked onto the main assembly hall of the $1 billion industrial complex. The launcher jolted as two R-360 Neptune missiles were fired on a low-angle trajectory, minimizing exposure to Russia's Kupol military satellites. During the first 15 minutes of their terminal journey, the missiles maintained a medium altitude of 492 feet, cruising at 528 miles per hour, near subsonic speed. The objective was to break free from the launch area detection zone, sever any traceable launch signature, and transition into a radar-neutral flight corridor. At this altitude, the R-360 Neptune pair fell outside the priority envelope of long-range early warning radars, which are optimized for high-altitude or high-speed targets. Their radar reflections were weak, stable, and lacked clear threat characteristics, never crossing the alert activation threshold. If they appeared on operator screens at all, they were dismissed as terrain clutter or non-standard contacts, insufficient grounds to escalate readiness. No pantsir or TOR systems were placed in firing posture. No regional alert was issued. In that critical moment, Russian air defense still believed nothing was inbound. As half the flight elapsed, the Neptune pair abandoned a straight optimal path. The missile actuators began adjusting the axis in small increments, just a few degrees at a time, enough to shatter every destination prediction logic within Russian defensive systems. The flight path fractured into subtle segments, pushing Russian air defense into a state of passive confusion. The target no longer formed a stable vector for continuous tracking. Predictive algorithms failed to merge the signals into a coherent threat, repeatedly downgrading the contact to uncertain. During a night shift, such signatures are routinely categorized as kinematic noise or tracking error, insufficient to justify interception orders. At 4:23 a.m., Russian air defense finally began to sense something abnormal. Several radars in the Rostov region registered brief reflection spikes, too weak to confirm a missile, too vague to trigger an intercept sequence. When the missiles were less than 31 miles from the target, both abruptly altered course. The axis shifted toward a secondary vector, deviating away from the factory, appearing to overshoot the target entirely. The effect of this anomalous trajectory on Russia's intercept cluster was profound. Every defensive prediction collapsed. The S-300 task group was effectively outplayed. Putin's inherently reactive defense algorithms generated a cascade of results, all wrong. This was no accident. It was a deliberate Ukrainian Navy deception maneuver, formally checkmating Moscow's spatial geometry assumptions. In the final seconds, as it appeared the missiles had missed, the Neptune pair suddenly snapped back, diving directly toward the roof of the main assembly hall, the weakest point in the entire chain. A Panzer S one-point defense vehicle near the facility finally rotated its turret, but at that instant, it could only observe, not intervene. The R-360 Neptune is a subsonic cruise missile over 16 feet long, with a launch weight of 1,873 pounds. Most critically, its 330-pound high-explosive penetrating warhead was traveling at approximately Mach 0.8. The Neptune punched through the factory roof in under 1 second. The 330-pound HE warhead detonated inside a confined space, a dry, compressed blast within the assembly hall. The explosion propagated as layered shockwaves, rebounding from the floor into the steel load-bearing beams, warping them, causing partial roof collapse that rapidly cascaded across the hall. No chain detonation was required. One precise breach was enough. Power in the assembly zone was completely lost. Automatic fire suppression systems lacked sufficient pressure. Assembly equipment, calibration jigs, and electronic production lines were deformed beyond recovery. Semi-finished UAVs did not burn violently, but suffered mechanical distortions, rendering them unusable. This is the most catastrophic form of damage for precision manufacturing. Rescue crews arrived, but the production line had been dead for over 20 minutes already. Thick black smoke blanketed the area, while the stench of burned electronics and intense heat formed a fire barrier, preventing rescue access. No casualties were reported, but civilian footage from nearby neighborhoods clearly showed the scale of destruction. The factory still exists on the map. Its UAV production capacity does not. The internal blast in the main assembly hall destroyed not only physical infrastructure, but the entire operational capability of Taganrog's UAV production complex. Roof collapse and warped load-bearing structures eliminated geometric precision, an absolute requirement for large UAV assembly. Jig systems, mounting tables, avionics integration lines, and flight calibration equipment were thermally and structurally distorted, making short-term recalibration impossible. Stocks of semi-finished UAVs and electronic components did not burn completely, but mechanical deviation and heat exposure forced total disposal. From an industrial standpoint, the production chain suffered functional death, irrecoverable through temporary repairs. The factory will require 6 to 9 months to restore even minimal capacity, assuming replacement machinery and facilities are available. During that period, Russia loses not only UAV output, but battlefield supply tempo, disrupting operational plans reliant on reconnaissance and medium-range strike UAVs. The plant still exists on paper, but in practice, it has been removed from the war. Another piece of news allowing Ukrainians and supporters of peace to begin the day on a positive note, though it will be anything but pleasant for Putin. Bye for now. (5:15 a.m., January 9th, 2026. Inside the locomotive cab rolling toward Vardiivka, a Russian train driver glances at the familiar timetable. On schedule, en route, and reinforced by Moscow's long-standing belief that the rear area is absolutely safe. No air raid sirens, no aerial patrols, no reason for concern, at least according to the rosy reports sent down from higher command. Yet in the 60 minutes prior, this 25-car train had already been tracked, every wheel rotation, every thermal signature, by electronic eyes that Russian surveillance systems, regrettably, were never trained to see. And in less than 5 minutes, 1,500 tons of diesel would prove that faith in total control is an expensive habit. By means of small, inexpensive UAVs, more than sufficient to turn Russian confidence into a lesson in physics. From the moment the clock passed 5:15, the story of the fuel train no longer belonged to the locomotive cab. It had been written days earlier by a very small group. Just 9.3 miles from the railway line, inside a carefully camouflaged MGCS field command pickup, Ukraine's Ghost Intelligence Unit watched thermal displays in silence. Streams of cold numbers flowed across encrypted links. Links Moscow believed it had fully controlled in Crimea. In the pale gray winter sky, they operated a single UJ-22, flying at a safe, steady altitude, almost boringly so. No dramatic maneuvers, no erratic flight path. Under the infrared camera, the train appeared with such clarity that even corrosion marks were visible. The locomotive engine glowed white at 124 degrees Fahrenheit, standing out sharply against the cold terrain. Behind it, 25 fuel tankers trailed in sequence. Their uneven thermal bands, the classic signature of fully loaded tanks. A perfect portrait of Russian logistics, massive, slow, and overly confident. This was not an opportunistic hunt. Over the previous 48 hours, Ukrainian intelligence had shadowed the train from its point of departure, recording every slowdown, every protected stretch, and, most critically, the gaps where Russian air defense and electronic warfare layers failed to overlap as neatly as on paper. Inside the locomotive cab, everything remained normal. The train continued at 29 miles per hour. But on the Ghost's screens, every passing second was simply a countdown to the moment they had already chosen. On the operational map, the 25-car train appeared like a dark red artery flowing steadily toward Vardiska, a fuel hub Moscow considered a reliable anchor for Crimea, at least according to its reports. Each car carried 60 tons of diesel, 25 cars, 1,500 tons, radiating clearly in the infrared spectrum. The equation was not limited to the $7 million evaporating from the budget, but to 1,500 tons of fuel capable of sustaining multiple armored formations, artillery units, and support vehicles for days. On paper, it ensured operational stability. On the battlefield, it represented a single point of failure. Lose it, and everything behind it begins to lose tempo. Then the train entered the fatal 20-minute window. Not a major breach, just a narrow gap where jamming stations failed to synchronize. A gap created not by lack of technology, but by complacent habits, something Russia had carried over from previous campaigns. Inside the Ukrainian field vehicle, encrypted links remained uninterrupted. No spoken countdown was needed. When a system grows confident for too long, it opens the door for itself. As the train slid past the final edge of the 20-minute window, patience ended. This was when Group 2, controlled by the Ghost, the FPV strike UAVs, lifted silently from their waiting position. No significant noise, no radio emissions. Nothing for Russian sensors, advertised as blanketing Crimea, to lock onto. Inside their lightweight carbon fiber frames ran fiber optic controls, a solution so brutally simple it bordered on an insult to the expensive electronic warfare doctrines Moscow prided itself on. You cannot jam what does not broadcast. Hair-thin fiber spooled out behind each UAV, maintaining perfect digital connectivity with the command vehicle 9.3 miles away. The video feed remains sharp, frame-perfect, without latency. Each UAV carried a modified PG-7VL warhead, originally designed to penetrate tank armor. Against the thin steel skin of fuel tankers, the choice was perfectly ironic. Russia was feeding its war with assets incapable of defending themselves against even basic anti-tank weapons. The FPV swarm accelerated to 99 miles per hour. Through the cameras, the tank cars rapidly in view. In the Russian electronic warfare stations began scanning the spectrum, a belated ritual. But for these UAVs, the radio sky simply did not exist. The confrontation had left the arena of proclamations and budgets. It entered the arena of physics, where Russia often arrives late, and this time was no exception. Only when the FPVs entered their final approach phase did the electronic picture around the train abruptly change. Across Russian air defense frequencies, a storm of jamming erupted, a reflexive, delayed response. Russia finally realized something was wrong, an awareness that came too late. A Lear-3 system was activated in emergency mode, first blasting wideband interference, then shifting rapidly to focus jamming on familiar frequency bands. When that still produced no effect, they escalated again, spoofing GPS, transmitting false satellite signals in hopes of forcing the UAVs to drift anywhere. As long as it wasn't Vardiska. On paper, this was textbook procedure. In reality, it was a test applied to the wrong subject. On the Ukrainian side, no one even changed their breathing. The video remained crisp. The trajectories remained stable. The fiber optic link transmitted data calmly, completely isolated from the million-dollar electromagnetic storm being generated. You can jam radio waves, but you cannot jam glass. Even as GPS around the train descended into chaos, the UAVs flew as if drawn with a ruler. Here, physics was in command. Russian electronic warfare was merely background noise. The Lear-3 operators witnessed the worst possible outcome, equipment running at full power, yet unable to touch the target. The electronic duel ended in silence. No explosions, no loss of control signals, only UAVs continuing forward, fast and straight. Once Russian electronic warfare had exposed its impotence, the tempo of the battle immediately shifted into an irreversible phase. Fuel car number 12 was designated first, a perfect target, positioned at the heart of 25 potential fire sources. The first strike UAV dropped altitude, holding a stable approach axis despite light turbulence forming around the train moving at 29 miles per hour. The approach speed held at 99 miles per hour. In the final moment, the camera shuddered slightly, more truthful than any radar. Then the frame followed by white light. Impact. The modified PG-7VL warhead did not explode in the conventional sense. It penetrated. A superheated metal jet punched through the tanker's thin steel skin, flash vaporizing the diesel inside. Pressure spiked inside the confined space. The rail car bulged and then tore apart, venting fire sideways like an uncontrolled jet engine. Temperatures leapt far beyond any safety scenario. Scenarios written to reassure, not to be tested. The irony lay in the safety design Russia trusted, the intercar venting system. Built to equalize pressure during fueling, it now became a highway for catastrophe. Burning diesel vapor raced into adjacent cars. Within seconds, a long section of the train turned into a literal chain reaction fire front. Inside the locomotive cab, alarms cascaded. Emergency braking was applied, but inertia does not read press releases. With 1,500 tons in motion, the train did not stop on human command, especially when that command came from a system that had just proven its faith in absolute safety. On Ukrainian special operations screens, the fire blossomed exactly as calculated. No cheering, no commentary. They knew this was only the first contact. That first contact did more than destroy a single tanker. In seconds, it rewrote the conditions of the entire battlefield. Flames from car number 15 formed a violent convective column, pulling in cold air and hurling it back as chaotic vortices. Temperatures climbed so fast that the rails began to discolor, a phenomenon Russia's rear area stability manuals had never considered worth preparing for. The second strike UAV approached car number 7 through a sky tearing itself apart. Gusts shifted constantly. Black smoke thickened. Heat shimmer warped the image like boiling water. The operator corrected the trajectory breath by breath, a skill absent from the self-congratulatory reports of Crimea's rail security units. Below, Russian troops opened fire with AK-74s. Streams of 5.45mm rounds cut through smoke, delivering more confidence than effect. Firing at a UAV moving nearly 99 miles per hour in three-dimensional space, amid thermal convection and smoke, is a ritual of reassurance, much like Moscow continuing to call this a localized incident when reporters ask questions. The third UAV headed for car number 19. In the cab, emergency brakes had already been pulled, but 1,500 tons rolling does not stop. Rear cars continued sliding into the fire, turning inertia, Russia's presumed ally, into a traitor. On Ukrainian command screens, this came as no surprise. Once the hell created by Russia's own logistics began running itself, all by-the-book reflexes became meaningless. Before the fire columns could weaken, the air above the train became an aerodynamic maze. Vortices, convection, and dense smoke sealing off every clean approach. At that moment, the Ukrainian team shifted into the phase Moscow hates most, stacking targets, forcing catastrophe to propagate faster than any command could keep pace. The second UAV forced its approach axis. No more clean flight path, no perfect angle. In smoke and thermal distortion, the only standard was close enough to trigger a chain reaction. Impact occurred in an instant. The penetrator opened another mouth of fire, extending the inferno along the train's length. Heat surged, more cars burned. On the ground, sporadic AK-74 fire traced futile lines. In the locomotive cab, alarms fell silent as cables and sensors were incinerated. Remaining control efforts evaporated, not for lack of orders, but because physics does not negotiate. On Ukrainian command screens, the picture was unmistakable. This was no longer a localized incident. This was a severed artery, and Russian confidence, fed by reports and habit, was paying the price to the cadence of fire and steel. As the inferno consumed the train's body, the team shifted focus to the last target with practical value, the locomotive. As long as that mass of steel could transmit force, Moscow could tell itself something was still salvageable. In war, such self-comforts are often best extinguished early. The final UAV plunged in under the worst conditions of the entire operation. The convective column had stabilized into a violent wind tube, lifting and pushing, turning flight calculations into chance. From the nose camera, the locomotive appeared as a warped block of metal, fire reflecting off scorched paint. Heat made the frame tremble, yet amid the chaos, the weakness had been pre-selected. The engine compartment, the last beating heart of a dying system. Below, a few Russian soldiers kept firing by reflex. Tracers crossed the frame and vanished into the sea of fire. No one was thinking about saving the train. At this point, defensive doctrine gave way to survival instinct, a late but familiar transition. Impact was direct. The penetrator activated, punching through the engine's heavy metal mass. The drivetrain died outright. No spectacular blast like the tankers, just the decisive silence of a machine that would never restart. The train stopped not because of breaking commands, but because physics closed the ledger. Even if some cars had not yet detonated, none could leave the scene. On command screens, the Ukrainian team logged results, collected data, and prepared to withdraw. No cheers, no statements. The field truck departed its camouflage position, heading straight for Kyiv, ready to receive them. Behind them, the first firefighting and rescue teams struggled against flames that barred access. As the fire subsided and only heavy black columns hung over the railway, the true impact of the strike began to take shape. No flags planted, no tactical victory announcements over loudspeakers. Only a logistics void appearing exactly where Russia had no contingency, along the supply axis toward Vardiska. 25 cars, each carrying 60 tons of diesel, 1,500 tons removed from the war equation in minutes. On paper, it could be offset by coordination. In reality, emergency order revisions, longer detours consuming fuel to move fuel, armored units forced to slow tempo, artillery rationing operating hours. Russia still had weapons, just not enough of what makes them move. Rails warped by heat are not fixed in an afternoon. They require machinery, repair crews, and most importantly, a safe environment to work. But safety was incinerated with the train once Ukraine proved it could strike arteries inside the stable zone. In Kiev, the math was viewed with colder measures. UAVs and consumables, a few $1,000s. In return, millions in destroyed assets, weeks of supply disruption, and a destination fuel depot starved of input. No territory seized, no ground held, just timing, linkage, and a node Russia believed protected. Expensive systems performed exactly as designed for an old kind of war. The current war went around them. While Moscow searched for language to call this a technical incident, reality stamped the truth. The rear area is not safe, only not yet chosen. As the sun climbed and black smoke thinned on the horizon, the final picture of the operation spoke more clearly than any statement. No national catastrophe, no decisive strategic strike, in Moscow's preferred phrasing for others' failures. Just a train erased, a supply line cut, and a logistics system forced to slow precisely when it could not. On the Russian side, responses followed the familiar script. Internal reports labeled it a localized loss. Media avoided numbers. Words like sabotage and defense penetration were replaced with incident and fire of unknown cause. But the battlefield does not read newspapers. Frontline units only knew fuel did not arrive, plans were suspended, and time, which they did not have, was being drained. In the end, this is not merely the story of a fuel train bound for Vardiska. It is a cold reminder that in this war there is no absolute rear, and that sometimes what collapses an entire system is not brute force, but a precisely timed touch at the right place, striking an opponent's false certainty.
At 4:50 a.m., the 11th of January 2026, the Caspian Sea was still half asleep. More than 93 miles offshore, Russia's Yuri Korchagin oil platform was quietly pumping ton after ton of crude into its storage tanks. A block of steel in a flat, calm sea. No fleet, no coastal missiles, no bombers, just oil, steel, and confidence built over many years. The platform normally produces 8 million cubic meters of crude per year, equivalent to roughly 22,000 tons of oil, about 160,000 barrels per day. A single day of disruption means $12 million vanishing straight into the sea beyond Putin's reach. And in less than 10 minutes, a swarm of kamikaze drones would fire this platform from the battlefield, literally. At that moment, beneath the black surface of the sea, 3 thin wakes were advancing. No emissions, no signals, nothing large enough to trigger a defensive reflex. Russia believed the Caspian was a rear area, and that belief opened the door to the worst moment of that morning. The shift on the Yuri Korchagin platform unfolded almost on autopilot. Nothing suggested this morning would differ from any other. Yet at the same time, 3.1 miles from the platform, 3 unmanned surface vehicles completed their passive approach phase. They were 3 Ukrainian Sea-Baby USVs, no continuous control signals, no systems active that could leave an electronic trace. To Russians, they simply did not exist. And that is the most dangerous moment in modern warfare, not when the enemy is defeated, but when the enemy has not yet been seen. At 4:58 a.m., the Caspian suddenly betrayed its familiar calm. On what Russia called a routine patrol route, a patrol helicopter appeared to complete a scheduled loop, exactly the kind of flight meant to demonstrate that everything remained under control. Then, under the harsh glare of sunrise, 3 narrow wakes appeared on the water so thin that without intent, they could easily be missed. At first, the crew's reaction was characteristically Russian, unhurried. The Caspian was a home pond. No one attacked here. Whatever was on the surface was probably drifting debris or a lost civilian craft. But speed does not lie. Those wakes moved with purpose, steady, deliberate, and far too fast to be random. The helicopter descended, switching to electro-optical observation, and here, the irony began to surface. A machine built to hunt tanks marketed as a NATO killer was now struggling to understand what it was looking at. The targets were too low, too cold, too small. Their thermal output nearly matched the sea. No sharp edges, no signature for Russia's proud systems to lock onto. The helicopter's door gun was brought into play, the familiar fallback when technology falters. Rounds stitched the water, throwing up impressive white plumes, great for cameras, meaningless for results. The maritime drones split formation, making short, irregular course changes. A system trained to track T-72 seconds was now forced to chase, dancing on the waves, and it lost. Radar confirmed objects, but not cleanly enough to do anything more than confirm. Electro-optics required manual tracking. At high speed, even tiny errors became misses, measured in tens of meters. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian vehicles did not need to look good, they only needed to go the right way. After a short pursuit, helicopter fuel drained faster than confidence. With no backup and no layered defenses in the Caspian, the helicopter was forced to withdraw, leaving behind the absolute safe zone for what it failed to stop. Control was handed off to the layer Russia trusted most, electronic warfare. On the platform, EW operators went to full power, blanketing the area with jamming like a familiar ritual. In theory, cut GPS and it's over. Anything flying, sailing, or crawling on the sea that depends on satellites will drift, stop, or self-terminate. At 5:05 a.m., GPS really did disappear. On Ukrainian command screens, satellite icons went dark cleanly. And then, nothing happened. The 3 wakes held course, speed, and rhythm. No panic circles, no drifting, no effect to report. That was the moment the illusion cracked. Russian EW struck an outdated layer while Ukraine had moved on long ago. When GPS was cut, the Sea-Baby vehicles switched to INS, calculating position through inertia and time. And when needed, they borrowed GLONASS, which Russia could not heavily jam without blinding itself. A defensive system forced to respect its own satellites while the opponent freely chooses what to use and what to discard. EW systems were now sustaining maximum power in salty maritime air. Heat rose, cooling fans howled, and modules pushed beyond design limits. The order to maintain jamming at all costs sounded heroic until an overheated link distorted the coverage shape. On the map, a perfect circle became a notched, broken form. No genius was required to grasp the truth. Russian defenses had just carved an entry point for death. Russia shouted across the spectrum. Ukraine listened and kept moving. By now, Russian EW was doing exactly what it had been taught, but the war had changed the question, and when the question changes, old answers become decoration. When electronic warfare produced no miracle, Russian defenses slid into a familiar state, tense, but unsure why. On the platform, firing points were reinforced, PKMs traversed, RPG teams were pushed higher for better angles. Everything was ready for a threat they had imagined themselves. At that exact moment, Ukraine's maritime drone team deliberately altered course. Not a withdrawal, not a loss of control, but a calculated desynchronization, one unit accelerating to cut across the approach axis. While Russia was busy firing at what it could see, the real threat had no need to stand out. Ukraine did not rush. They allowed the defense to burn through its own focus. No FPVs launched immediately. No early finishing blow. Only movement just different enough to force reactions, and every reaction exposed more of the defensive structure. In modern warfare, the loser is not always knocked down. Sometimes they step out of safety on their own. Defenses are built to counter frontal attacks, not chains of small, deliberate actions. And once the defense had turned its back on the true load-bearing point, the most dangerous phase of the morning officially began. Ukraine was only starting its next move. On the surface, the unmanned vehicles maintained a steady approach rhythm. Then, in a motion timed to the second, internal bays snapped open. From within, a swarm of kamikaze FPVs launched quietly. No satellite signals, no reliance on anything. Russian electronic warfare was screaming across the spectrum. They needed only imagery, and the oil platform ahead provided more than enough. From the defenders' perspective, this was the worst possible moment. A new threat appearing after all positions had already been exposed. PKM gunners reacted on instinct. Tracer rounds cut through the air, visually dramatic and tactically meaningless. The FPV swarm did not fly straight. It split, changed altitude, and threaded through gaps created by the very bursts meant to stop it. Their first targets were not decisive blows, but the elements that allowed the defense to function: radars, communication antennas, firing points. Each small, precise strike was enough to blind, mute, and confuse. Russia could absorb one large explosion. What it could not absorb were many small ones happening at the same time. The FPV warheads detonated almost instantly, shattering radar units and communications antennas on the spot. Once the FPVs finished their work, the Yuri Korchagin platform still appeared to stand tall, massive, and seemingly intact. But that was only the opening act. Seconds later, the USVs carrying the FPV swarms revealed themselves as fuses in their own right. The first slammed into an auxiliary support on the outer edge. The explosion was large enough to satisfy defensive reports claiming the threat had been intercepted. The structure shook violently, then settled. It did not collapse. On deck, there was relief, the kind of relief felt by those who believe the danger has passed. But Ukraine did not come to the Caspian for a burning photo. They came to change the shape of the load-bearing equation. The second USV approached more slowly, drawing concentrated small arms fire. An RPG detonated wide, throwing white water skyward. But the craft kept crawling forward slowly, very slowly. At that speed, many Russians began to treat it as a resolved problem. They were wrong. It struck the platform directly. The main detonation occurred below the waterline, precisely at a critical structural pillar. No spectacle, no need to look good, just the right place. There, 1,874 pounds of explosives did what dozens of bursts could not break the logic of the design. Steel braces built to distribute load began to distribute. Disaster. Force fed back into the remaining pillars in ways the 2007 design drawings had never anticipated. The platform listed 15 degrees. The ballast system screamed through its final ritual pumps, fighting to save a structure that had crossed the point of no return. This was the moment engineering met physics, and physics won. Ukraine did not need to sink the platform. They only needed to ensure Yuri Korchagin was no longer operational. Russia could claim it was still standing. At sea, standing at an angle is already defeat. After the underwater blast, the platform did not vanish beneath the waves, and in true Russian reporting tradition, that fact instantly became the basis for a familiar conclusion. The situation was under control. The platform still stood, smoke thinned. There was no dramatic collapse for television to exploit. But modern warfare does not require images that please domestic audiences. It requires operational results. Reality asserted itself within minutes. The excessive list pushed operations beyond acceptable risk thresholds. Automatic pumping systems shut down to prevent secondary incidents. Pipelines experienced asymmetric stress, vibrations spiking past safety limits. Systems designed to survive an accident were now dealing with a structurally unbalanced platform the scenario engineers hope never to encounter outside worst-case modeling. Russia did not lose because it lacked steel or explosives. It lost because it believed old assumptions still applied, that no one could strike from that far away. That an industrial installation in the Caspian did not require layered defenses. That cutting GPS would be enough. That not collapsed meant usable. Ukraine did not refute these assumptions with statements. They refuted them with reality. While Russia scrambled to assess damage, restrict information, and rename failure, the message had already been delivered quietly, without official confirmation. A tilted platform in distant waters was enough to force staff planners to rewrite how they define safety. Ukraine did not need a large navy to influence the Caspian. They only needed to prove that distance is no longer armor and that systems built for a previous century will continue to fail, not because the opponent is stronger, but because they learned faster. And while Russia debated whether it had lost, the real question had already shifted. Is there anywhere left far enough to be considered safe? As the sun climbed higher, the platform remained tilted, silent, and no longer capable of performing the function it was built to serve. For Russia, this was the most uncomfortable outcome, not dramatic enough to label a catastrophe, yet far too clear to pretend nothing had happened. An industrial structure in distant waters, once viewed as a symbol of strategic depth, became a reminder that such depth exists only in thinking. Russia had done many things right according to its own manuals. There were patrols, electronic warfare, defensive fire, reports declaring the situation handled. But all of it rested on a shared assumption. The enemy would attack in familiar ways. Ukraine did not shatter that assumption with overwhelming technology, but by refusing to play by old rules. No opposing fleets, no surface battle, no cruise missiles, only small, inexpensive platforms combined with patience and a clear understanding of what was worth striking and what was not. Ukraine did not need to prove it was stronger than Russia in every domain. It only needed to prove Russia had prepared for the wrong war. In Moscow, maps would be updated. Safe zone circles would be redrawn farther out, thicker, and more expensive. But the problem was not radius, it was mindset. When a state believes distance is a shield, that civilian industrial assets do not require military-grade defense, every additional kilometer is merely borrowed time. The morning in the Caspian ended not with collapse, but with a shift in perception. Ukraine did not seize the sea. It did something more dangerous. It took away certainty. And in modern warfare, once certainty disappears, every structure, no matter how distant, begins to feel fragile.